Yes. Yes. Okay. And this is the plan for today's session. So first, I will give you a very brief introduction to the context of this training series, and then we will move on to our editor-led presentation from Professor Martin Head, who is the editorial lead of JoGA. And after Martin's presentation, we will have time for Q&A, so please note down any questions as we go. And finally, before we close, I will give you a very short overview of the upcoming training sessions in this series, so you know what to expect next. At the 2025 ERA pre-conference, so we officially launched the call for this special issue. And I think the motivation behind it is that we think traditional academic publishing can sometimes be hierarchical, isolating, and even exclusionary, especially for early career researchers. And many ECRs tell us that they don't receive structured guidance through the publication process, and they have limited access to network that can help strengthen their manuscripts, and they face real barriers if they don't already have publication experience. So we wanted to challenge that. Therefore, together with BSG-ERA and JoGA, we created this special issue initiative. We wanted it to be collaborative, supportive, inclusive, and community-driven. So the idea is to build a process that focuses on capacity building, on lifting up ECRs, and on creating an environment where you don't have to navigate publishing alone. Then how do we achieve this? So we designed a set of developmental activities based on the needs that our special issue authors shared with us. And these include a series of editor-led training sessions, practical workshops, shut up and write sessions, and mentoring. So today's session is part of the editor-led training series. And we think we should make this open to everyone because we think many researchers beyond our special issue authors can really benefit from them. And but the other three types of activities are specifically for the special issue authors. And in terms of who is behind this initiative, so the first is myself, and apologize for not properly introducing myself at the beginning, but for now, I will give you a very brief introduction about myself. And so my name is Mengxing Zhou Shi, and I'm currently an associate lecturer at the University of St. Andrews. So I'm also the publication coordinator from ERA and ECR representative from JoGA. And then we also have Junjie here. So Junjie, would you mind unmuting yourself and give say hi to everyone?
Hello, everyone. Thanks, Mengxing. I'm Junjie Huang. I'm a lecturer in dementia aging and design in University of Stirling. I'm also the publication representative for BSG. Very nice to meet you all. We have so many attendees. That's brilliant. Thanks.
Yes, thank you, Junjie. And yes, that of course we have Martin here. But I think Martin will introduce himself properly in his presentation and also tell you more about JoGA. And then the three of us are coordinating the whole program, but we also supported by an extended team, including the members of ERA committee and the JoGA editorial board, who have contributed to shaping and supporting this initiative. So I think this initiative was very well received. We received 42 submissions in response to the call, which is, I think, an amazing number. And then our aim from the beginning was to be as inclusive as possible. So after reviewing the abstracts, we suggested certain of them would be a better fit for other journals. That left us with 29 papers included in this initiative. And then we grouped them by themes, and the plan is to have 4 thematic special issues under this initiative. Okay, so that's all the background about this training session. And before we move on, just a quick note that if you are not yet an ERA member, please join us, which will give you access to a supportive community and opportunities like this one. So Junjie will share how to join ERA in the chat. Okay. So without further ado, I will now hand over to Martin for his presentation. I will stop sharing my screen. Yeah.
Awesome.
Martin,
Thank
please.
you very much, Ming-Xing, for the wonderful organizing all of this and everything you've done up to this point as well. You and Junjie have been amazing, and the wider ERA group. And I think it's testament to the initiative that you're doing to support early career research in their writing that we have 45, 46 people here. And I think the program that you put on will really support that community. And also as editorial lead for the journal, I'm extremely excited that we've got so many amazing papers. It was really incredible to read through all the different things that people are engaged in. So we're really happy to support this. And just to say, the support goes beyond the sessions. If people want to get in touch, please feel free to do so at the sessions. We can circulate contact details for me as well as for the journal. So I'm going to talk what I've been asked to talk about is really how to turn your research ideas into publication. Sorry, I've managed to turn this thing on without sharing the screen. And I am going to talk about that a little bit in relation to, or sort of maybe predominantly in relation to JoGA, because that's where I'm currently based and that is where the initiative is located. Can you see the screen okay? Brilliant. I'm going to put it on slideshow. Hopefully that does the trick.
Yep.
Brilliant, because I can't now see you because it's decided to do my slideshow this way around. So a little bit about me before I start, because obviously you've come along to hear about kind of how to get published. So you want to make sure that you're talking to someone that has a little bit of experience in doing this. So just to give you, if you like, my kind of bona fides, I've been involved in editorial as an editor for various journals for quite some time. So currently, obviously, with the Journal of Global Aging, but I'm also an associate editor for a medical sociology journal called Social Theory and Health. And I'm on the editorial board, so not one of the sort of active editorial team, for a number of other journals on aging. And I was at Aging Society as an associate and then deputy editor for about 5 years. So I like to think that I've got a good insight into the editorial process from different journals, and we all do things slightly differently. And I try to use that in order to make sure that what we do at JoGA is as good as it can be. So it's not just about learning what's worked at other journals, but really some of the messages about what hasn't worked particularly well. And I think what we came to do at JoGA is to make this a collaborative process and a supportive process. And when I was reading through a lot of the comments that people made when they applied for the special issue, was that frustration about the reviewing and the editing process, which can be quite kind of opaque, often isn't very constructive and supportive, and we want to sort of move away from that. One of the things that I want to also then just kind of touch on to demystify some of that is this editorial process. And I know some of you have been through this, so you'll be familiar with it, or at least the front and the back end of it, as in submitting and getting your decisions. But I want you to kind of just have an idea about where the bits are in this process, because each of these bits has a different set of criteria that we're looking for to make sure your paper goes from these ideas that you're having or the material that you've got to something that's published as a high quality paper at the end. So initially, when you submit your paper, it actually doesn't come to me. It will go to one of our administrators at the press, and they'll do an initial sweep through to make sure the paper meets all the criteria. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this later. I know it's the most boring thing you can do because you're excited about your paper, you want to get all your ideas down, but it's also really important to know about all the technical things that the journal expects you to do to make sure that you don't fall at those early hurdles, which can be really disheartening. And kind of, the last thing you want to do is, after you've put all your energy and excitement into getting your paper submitted, get it pushed back to you because you've used the wrong type of abstract, whether it's structured or unstructured. Your referencing is wrong. You've submitted it as the wrong type of article. All these little things can just kind of derail you, particularly if you're new to the process. If it passes those initial checks, it will come to me, end up in my inbox. And my first job is to have a read through of it to see whether it fits the journal and whether I'm happy for it to go out. It's important for you to remember at this stage, I am not an expert in everything. In fact, some days I'm not entirely sure I know which socks and shoes to put on. But what I do know my way around are the methods. So that's the bit that I can focus on in particular. I want to know the content matches, but in terms of thinking about those initial sweeps, it's important to make sure that your methods are as clear as possible, because that is often, if it's an empirical paper anyway, that is often where the decision about if this is a paper that is sufficiently rigorous or is that we feel confident in the findings to be able to send out, because this will often be what reviewers look for predominantly as well. So we sort of know that. If I feel that the paper is in scope, and I'll talk a bit about that in a minute, it makes a good contribution to knowledge, then my job is to find at least 2 reviewers to send it out to and solicit their reviews and their comments. I think, again, for a number of you that have gone through this process, the next stage is often what can be a bit frustrating, because a lot of editors, and with time pressured, I understand, will get the 2 sets of reviews and often just send them straight back out to the author without necessarily taking an intervening step, which is to read through the reviews and make an informed decision. And sometimes that informed decision is by indicating to the author that they don't agree as an editor with some of the reviewers' comments, or that to indicate to the author that they should focus on certain comments over others, because that's what I as an editor think is most important, particularly for having that debate within the journal and kind of positioning the journal for where I think that it kind of should be. Then you as the author will eventually get your decision. Ordinarily, it's a revise and resubmit, and you have the information given to you in terms of what's expected. Different journals do it differently. Some will have a form. Some just expect you to write back a page. Some want more detailed comments, and we can discuss that later in this process that Mengxi and Junji have organized about when we talk about how to deal with reviewers' comments. So just to kind of say, what my role is, because again, I think it's important to understand this, because often, and I'm not saying necessarily in this room, but often there's an assumption that journals are there sort of as goodwill to and should publish academic work regardless. It's important to recognize that journals are companies, and some of them are extremely lucrative, sort of private organizations, businesses, industries that make a lot of money. And the editor's role within that is kind of to look after the reputation of the journal and the sort of the publisher in general. I should say we're extremely lucky to partner with Policy Press, Bristol University Press, which is a social enterprise. So it puts its money back into the publishing process. They're incredibly supportive with us, and also with the Journal of Global Aging, as it is the official journal for the British Society of Gerontology. We're also very well supported by our professional society, but it also means that the journal has to act in the interests of the professional society as well. So we can't do anything that would bring our society into disrepute through our publishing. Then, like I said, I liaise with the reviewers to find papers and the administrator to make sure that everything stays on track. And eventually, as I said, I'm the one who will make the final decision in terms of the decision that comes to you. So like I said, when it comes to me, if it gets past that initial stage, the first thing that all editors look for, or should look for, is this idea about being in scope. So does the paper that you've submitted fit what the journal is designed to do. And I know that sounds incredibly simple, and you would think that's the thing that everyone checks before they send their paper off. You would be surprised, and I will say not at JoGA. I think JoGA, the submissions we get are very in scope, but that's, I think, because we have quite on the one hand, quite a broad scope, but on the other hand, quite a clear aim and vision for the journal in terms of what we want it to do. But other journals that I've worked on, definitely you get a lot of papers that either the authors are just bouncing around to find a home, or they've misunderstood what the journal is, they haven't read the aims and scopes, they're just sticking it in because they are being hopeful. It is by far and away the main reason why your paper will get rejected. So whilst it might seem like a good idea to go and look, submit your paper to a number of journals if it's getting rejected from journals, actually I think it's a bit of a false economy, because it means that it will take you time to get those comments back, or to get the paper back, because it will sit in with the editor. Even that initial process can take a couple of weeks to go through, and then the editor will make a decision. And really, it's stopping you from kind of getting the paper to the best audience. So always take time to look at the aims and scope of the journal that you're thinking about submitting to. If you're not sure, then I always recommend email one of the editors and just say, look, I've got this paper. I'm not sure if it's in scope. Do you think you would be happy with this submission? Most editors will get back to you at some point, not always straight away, because it's in their interest as well not to have to deal with papers that they just can reject because it's not in scope. So don't feel bad about contacting editors, because really it's helping them as well as it's helping you. Secondly, and again, I think this is important, be clear about what it is your paper does. When I started in my academic publishing career, I thought, I was being really cool, very clever, and showing, just how much I'd read. And I would have these quite elaborate titles for my papers, referencing literature and all the rest. Doesn't help. It doesn't really help the reviewers, doesn't really help the editor. And as I'll show a little bit later, it doesn't necessarily help you, because it makes your paper more difficult to understand. So again, it's kind of boring, but really tell the reader what the paper's about, nice and clear, and make sure that the title matches the abstract and that the abstract matches what you're doing in the paper. Again, sounds like simple stuff, but if your paper's gone through a couple of revisions, or you've had quite a lot of input from different members of your co-author team, if you've got a co-author team, often these things can kind of get a little bit muddied. So make sure that everything lines up, and that when it comes to the editor and the reviewer, that they're clear about what it is you're doing, because then they can make their decision about the paper in terms of the, if you like, the criteria that you set by saying what the paper is about. Are the methods sound? So I've touched on this. Because I'm not going to know everything about every aspect of social gerontology, the thing that I will be able to focus on are the methods, because that's something that will be common to all empirical papers. With the theory papers, again, it's about seeing whether the structure of the argument and the theory and the constructs, the argument kind of fits together and has a logical flow. Do I think it will be of interest to our readership, which clearly links to whether it's in scope for the journal? Is the standard of writing comprehensible? I will happily admit that my spelling is pretty terrible, and I turn the grammar check off on all software programs I write, because me and Microsoft fundamentally disagree about how to write a good sentence. So it's not about it necessarily being perfect English, but it's about, do I think the reader can follow the argument properly? So are you presenting your arguments in a logical way? Spelling and language issues we can always pick up later in the review process. That's not the main thing for me. It's whether there's a logical, comprehensible flow of argument and narrative that the reader can follow through. And then sort of latterly, and it's not crucial, but do I think this will be a paper that will get highly cited or have an impact in the debate that the author is trying to connect with? Because we also, as a journal, want our papers to be out there and kind of showcasing the excellent articles that we publish, as well as the quality of the journal itself. So I know from the comments that have come through in the applications to be part of the special issue that a number of you are thinking about how to publish from your PhD. This is primarily aimed at those countries where your PhD is by monograph rather than PhD by publication, because your PhD by publication, you're already involved in kind of publishing papers as part of this. I mean, you might want to turn some of the other aspects of your PhD into other kind of academic outputs. But for those people that are writing monographs, it is often a real challenge to think how to reduce that mass amount of work that you've done in your PhD, 80, 90, 100,000 words, down to a manageable paper of 6, 7, 8,000 words. And I know it's a bit sort of cliched, but the way I think we think about the PhD, certainly in the UK context, is as your apprenticeship. So you need to show all the skills that you have in your PhD. So the literature, showing how amazing you are at doing all this reading and finding all these papers, the methods, doing all different types of stuff, showing your kind of skills across a wide range of methodological applications and analysis, and again in the conclusion by kind of weaving it all together. For a paper, it's a very different approach. You need to kind of think about that craft work. So taking those the key ideas that you have and reshaping the material from your PhD to something that's much more precise and makes a clear intervention into that debate. So the idea isn't to show everything that you know, which is your PhD, but to think about picking out those parts that you think are going to make the most important contribution, and which are the topics that interest you the most. In your PhD or your dissertation at a master's level, you're going to be covering quite a lot of material. So what is it that you think after doing all of that, where you can make the most important contribution? So is it around theory? Are you addressing a particular knowledge gap? Is it around methods? Are there particular methods that you're using or that you've improved upon the methodological approach in previous research that's been done there? Or is it that you are contributing new evidence or improved evidence from a different part of the world, using a different method within a particular area of research? So you're adding to the knowledge that way. So you can think about this contribution to knowledge across a broad number of terms. It might be that in your papers you're doing more than one of these, although in which case you might think about addressing them as slightly different papers so you don't get bogged down in trying to do too much. And I think that's one of the big problems that people find making this transition. You often do too much, and it's a difficult thing to push back from, because in your PhD and your dissertation, you're being told to showcase all your amazingness. But from the paper's perspective, you want to give each of these issues enough breathing space that you can work through them in a much more constrained sort of number of words. So if you try to do too much in a paper, weirdly you can end up not doing enough because you don't give enough time to be able to thoroughly work through your arguments. The other thing to think about, and this goes back to the original point around scope, who do you want to speak to? So who is your key audience? So I've just kind of thought up a title here of a paper, which wouldn't be particularly unusual. So looking at the impact of housing conditions on functional capability among older adults. But this paper could quite legitimately go to 3 different audiences, all of whom would be interested in it, but for different reasons. So who are you writing this paper for? Because that will impact on how you write it, because there will be different conventions, arguments, and literatures to draw on. It doesn't mean that you ignore the other 2 bits, but it's about how you frame the paper in relation to that audience. So, for example, if you were aiming at the housing conditions literature, it might be that discussions around social gerontology in older adults are relatively new in that area. I mean, I don't necessarily think they are, but that could be your USP there. Whereas if you were aiming in the social gerontology literature, it might be that the intersection between housing conditions and functional capability was the newness there. And I think this is important because, and I will touch on this later, it depends on how you introduce the topic and how you frame it to get people engaged with your research. So I'm not going to go into this in a big detail, but these are the aims and scope for JoGA. You can find them on the website. There's lots of words here because, you know, we want to make sure we have a suitably broad and, like I said, inclusive scope to allow people to submit papers from a range of different issues from around the world using a variety of methods. But really, the skill here is to pick out the key bits to know where the paper sits. So it's these bits that I've underlined. So we are particularly interested, so this is us signaling, we are particularly interested in work from studies that go beyond the nation state and explore these other geographies. So that's our real kind of USP, I think, at JoGA. That's the bit that we really kind of want to get known for. And that's the bit that if you're able to land your paper there, then you know that it's really in scope. We also take a number of different types of papers. So again, thinking about how you're going to have that intervention in the debate, what type of paper suits what you're writing best, because they have different formats, and I'll identify those in a minute. And again, understanding aging in a global context, inter and multidisciplinary perspectives are particularly valued, and submissions from disciplines that are currently underrepresented. So we're signaling to people that land on our page certainly the types of papers which we are particularly interested in. Not to say that we don't look at all papers equally, but if you have papers that fit those criteria, then you know that you are kind of pushing an open door in terms of being in scope. The other important place to go then when you're thinking about where to find a place for your paper, and I know this seems like the very boring stuff to do that you do at the end when you've written this wonderful paper, but I'm encouraging you to think about doing it at the front end, because like I said, if you go away and write this amazing paper, and then you go and look at the instructions and you think, oh no, now I have to do it like, and you have to rearrange your paper, you lose some of that flow, you lose some of that energy and that enthusiasm. So understanding how to write the paper for the journal that you want to submit to, almost at that early draft stage, is really important, because you don't want to put a lot of energy into something that you have to undo later. So I'm not going to get into this, but this is what the author's instructions would look like for a research article in JoGA. So it's kind of telling you what we accept, what the parameters are, what the tone of the language should be, so who we see our audience as being. So what I've tried to do here, or we as a team, we've tried to make it as clear as possible to the authors about what it is that we're looking for in the paper, because that's what we think our readership is going to be looking for in the paper. So we are the sort of the conduits, the sort of the sort of the translators between you as the author and as the reader. So in terms then of what the paper structure might look like or should look like, another thing that is not uncommon is people, and I've been very guilty of this myself, will leave the abstract and the keywords right to the very end, particularly keywords, and then you get a load of garbage because people panic and they either just write aging, people, stuff, things, because they think, well, no one really cares about the keywords. It's just a paper that matters. I'm not bothered about it. I know what's important. So the journal's making me do this for no good reason. I say the opposite. The keywords are important for a number of issues, as with the abstract. They're the first thing that I see as an editor. They're the first thing that the reviewers will see. This is in terms of the abstract. So they have a big impression. So they frame what the reader is expecting to start with. Keywords are crucial because they help me match the paper to the reviewers. So when I think the paper is good enough to send out, I can run a keyword match to the reviewers database, areas of expertise, and where we get a match, I'm like, well, that person's probably in a good position to review that paper because they do work in the same field. We do it slightly differently at JoGA because we've got the editorial reviewer college, but even so, it helps me match people in our team to authors so they get the best possible review by someone that is an expert in the field, rather than just throwing it out to a general kind of reviewing pool. Also, thinking about when your paper eventually gets published, these keywords are often the things that will be used for searches for things like systematic inclusion, systematic reviews, or just in literature reviews anyway. So good keywords make your paper more discoverable. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But also helping that early part as well. So both ends of the publication lifespan, keywords are really crucial. How to write a good literature review. So you've got my attention, the abstract's really good, right? I want to get on and kind of know, right, so where does this paper sit? I would say, again, the style of writing introductions has changed remarkably over the period that I've been involved in academia. It was almost like at the start that there were murder mystery novels where, as the reader, you kind of had to figure out what the contribution was, and the author took you through this sort of journey, this maze of literature, and then at the end revealed how amazing their contribution is going to be. We live in a different world. We live in a different way in which people consume knowledge. We're time pressured. There are so many more papers to get through now. I think it is best practice, or best for you, if you state really early on what your contribution to knowledge is in the paper, so the reader already knows it, so they're already kind of sensitized to that. Particularly, again, for those of you in the UK, I think this is important for things like the research evaluation framework, the REF, because again, when your papers are being evaluated by REF, the person who's doing it is not going to take the time to read through all of the papers they get given in microscopic detail and figure out what your original contribution is. If you tell them early on, then they're really happy about that because their job is kind of done, and then they can kind of make an assessment about the extent to which they kind of see this as being true. Also, pulling on what I said earlier about particularly those people who are working to transform their PhD or dissertations into papers. The aim of the literature review is not to review all the literature. And again, I know some of the things that I'm saying might sound really self-evident, but there is a tendency for people to just want to kind of put more and more in, as if it's quantity rather than necessarily the quality of literature review that's going to kind of make the case. Actually, you need to be really clear and strategic about the literature that you put in. I think it should be systematic in its coverage. So I think you should find I think you should try and do some kind of systematic search for the literature, so you're not cherry picking things that do or don't support your arguments. But when you're writing it, you need to, I think, really keep it on point and say, well, how does this information help the reader? What's the value of this paper that I'm citing in relation to what I'm doing for my research? And then to go back to the point about thinking about your audience, I would say avoid, generic cliched statements. And we often get this, I think, when people aren't necessarily in social gerontology, but have some older people in their research and think, well, we could submit to a gerontology journal, and they start by telling me that the global population is aging. And I kind of think, well, I run a journal called the Journal of Global Aging. I probably know this, and my readers probably know this. So you don't need to do that. And I know it's a bit of a kind of a comfort blanket to get into it, but actually I think you need to get to the bits that's important and unique about your paper. So, and I will say that writing literature reviews is different, and people do it differently. And these are the elements that I think are good, having been an editor, like I said, on a number of journals for quite some time, almost over 10 years, almost 10 years now. When I've tasked myself to think, well, what do I think is good? When I'm reading papers and I'm reviewing them to send either as a reviewer or as an editor to send out, and I read a lot of papers, what do I think works from a reader's perspective? And I boiled it down to what I think these are the 5 bits of what I think is a good introduction or a literature review. What is it? So, what is it? What are you looking at? And again, it sounds obvious, but actually we all know that, different terms, different concepts have a number of different interpretations. So how are you defining the thing that you're looking at? And again, why is it important? What are the key debates that are going on that situate or frame this topic you're interested in? And what's your contribution to knowledge within this? So this is, again, where you can say early doors in your paper, how your paper makes an intervention in these debates. What do we know about it? So this is, if you like, the standard, like I said, systematic review. I quite like this narrative synthesis approach. It's what I tend to use in my papers. It's not for everyone, but I think it's a good way to allow you to give an impression of the relative balance of evidence across different types of studies that have been done. But what do we still need to know? So where are the evidence gaps in relation to your paper? Not everything. So what's the bit that you're interested in? And then how does your paper contribute to this? So again, an opportunity for you to reiterate your contribution to knowledge in a more precise way, particularly in relation to the method you're going to use. I'm going to go a little bit quicker because I realize I'm getting a bit close on time. So how do you sort of go about this? Like I said, I think, and I'm happy to share the slides, by the way, after this, I think it's important to take a more structured approach. Again, I think a more traditional, or let's say somewhat old-fashioned approach was the idea you can just sit down and write your introduction from start to finish. I mean, personally, I don't know how anyone can do this. I delete half of what I write and it ends up in being written back to front, inside out, but never mind. But also it introduces the risk of publication bias, because if you're just writing without necessarily doing the work to really kind of look at what the evidence is, you're going to find the papers that support this kind of argument that you have. So I actually think beyond just a more practical way to write your papers, and I've given some links here on ways in which this can be done, I think it's also a better way in terms of the quality of the science. Then, like I said, methods are very much the key to the paper, if it's an empirical paper. Like I said, at that first stage, it's where I'll feel most confident in making my decisions. Make sure you give all the relevant information to allow the editor and the reviewer to judge the robustness of your study. It still astonishes me that people don't do this. So this is where I do find a lot of the errors in writing papers. People say something like, I interviewed people in a neighborhood. And I'm like, well, how many people did you interview? How did you find them? What was the method of approaching them? So there was so much information that you as an author know instinctively because you've done it, but I as a reader don't. And the other thing, and again, particularly for a journal like JoGA, which we do have an international global focus, if you like, don't assume the reader knows about your city, your country, where you've conducted the research. And that goes for all contexts. So again, people writing in the UK, we assume that everybody knows what Swansea or Leicester or Birmingham is, but we're talking to a global readership as well as a global authorship. So I want to see us all reflect on that context in which the study has been done. Again, if it's the UK or Mongolia or Canada, what is it about what's going on in that area and that region, country, that the reader needs to know in order to be able to contextualize your research, in their research. The last little bit that I want to get to, and I'm going to kind of whiz through this, but again, it's important because I want you to be aware of it, because when you're writing a paper, you always almost as well have to think about what it looks like at the end. So I don't think any of us just want to write our papers and have them sit in a journal and never get read. So how can we think also about making sure our papers get read? And a lot of that is the work you have to do after the journal has been published in order to get it out into the world, get people to connect with it. And this means making sure your paper is discoverable, and also that you're happy to sort of promote it through social media, which I appreciate now is a more difficult terrain. But actually the evidence is that papers that do get published, papers that are published that do get social media engagement also tend to be the ones that are more likely to get read and cited. So a little bit of research I did myself looking at papers in social gerontology. I think I'm probably going to kind of wind up on that because I want to give time for comments and questions. But yeah, also some references, links to resources that you might find useful thinking about, again, the life cycle of the publication, and particularly in terms of what you can do once your paper is published to improve its impact. So thank you very much. I apologize, I've gone slightly over, but there we go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Martin, for your insightful presentation. And as I mentioned, this will be posted in the Aging Back YouTube channel, so you will be able to revisit it again. And also, Martin shared some resources in his slides, so I imagine that we will be able to share the slides with you as well. So now, perhaps let's have perhaps 10 minutes for the question Q&A. Yeah, so the audience, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions, or you can post your questions in the chat. Yeah, I say Dominic said if it's possible to say the slide. Martin skipped over towards the end. Yeah, if it is okay, we will share the slides with everyone. Yeah, we have Roya. Please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, good. So thank you so much for organizing this. I really benefit a lot from it, just right from the beginning. And thank you, Professor Hyde, for this presentation. So I see that you kind of follow the kind of like a I would say like the conventional structure of the essay in a chronological order, but I'm just wondering if you have any suggestions for an ideal timeline for writing an essay, or just take it as a project. What might be the presumably ideal timeline for finishing the project? I know it's a broad question, but I'm just very curious because you talked about the structure of the essay pretty much in a very chronological order, but I know sometimes writing an essay seems to be like a non-linear way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, I don't think I've ever written a paper from word 1 to word 8,000. I think by definition, the different times, and I think it's unrealistic to try to do that, and I don't think it's very helpful. I think you need to think about what the main part of your paper is going to take most energy, and it's probably going to be the analysis, and that's where you're going to sit for the most part and think about how to do that, and that I think will often drive what the paper looks like as well. I think that the normal idea for how long it takes to write a paper is 12 weeks. So the idea is 12 weeks to write a paper. I don't think that's from absolute scratch, because obviously that requires data collection. But once you've got those bits and pieces together, I don't think it's unreasonable to think in 3 months you could turn out a good first draft. Again, that depends on other commitments that you have, and it also depends on how many people you have on your authorship team and what type of support you have from peers and supervisors. Good peer group, good support group, you can probably turn your paper around more quickly. Lots of co-authors, obviously you need to engage them. It takes a little bit longer to sort of get comments back from people. But I think somewhere 12 weeks is a kind of a mean, and then more or less depending on the support that you have. I think the thing about the linearity of it, or the time spent, is you still want to make sure that the paper hangs together as a whole. So if you find that you're spending more time on one thing that's squeezing other parts of the paper, particularly if you're doing lots of analysis and you don't have time to describe it all, that's when you might need to think about turning it into 2 papers or focusing the analysis a little bit more.
Thank you. And next we have Dominic, and then we have like 2 questions from the chat, which after you answer Dominic's question, we will go through that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation to both of you. Nice to see you. It's a silly question, sorry, Martin, but I am very new to this. When you talk about the keywords, how much of the keywords with regard to the academic keywords also link with online Google type keywords that you would put in, say, a blog post or something? Is that search overlapping, or is it completely different? Okay.
No, it definitely overlaps, and that's why I say, so I'm not quite sure how Google does organize Google Scholar. It's not chronologically, it's not even by sites. There's a weird search engine optimization going on under there. But certainly if you want your paper to be discoverable, so if you go on to Google Scholar, and I know the area that you work in, you put something in like, language and aging, or cultural, cross-cultural differences in language. you want Google to find that paper, and it will search the keywords. It'll probably search a little bit of your title, but your title won't have all the things in that you want it to discuss, because you want, for example, say the methods. So the keywords can also have methods in. So longitudinal study, systematic review, which will obviously again help your discoverability for different audiences. So again, I think